Now, if we all can have our religion, so there's no threat from the state at this point, then what you get is one civilian to the next civilian. And if I'm a Christian, and I come with a foot-long cross, and that everywhere I go, I carry this cross and I say, this is because my religion decrees that. And I suddenly start to go into sermons and I start singing hymns and, that sort of thing. Then what you get is a perversion of religion. You find that religious people, if they do not respect the public space, so if I do not respect the fact that you're secular, that you will not respect that I'm religious. And then the state will interfere. And if you want to have a maximum of individual liberty, the best you can do is keep the state out as much as possible. Mm-hmm. Because when the state comes in, you're going to get uniform rule. And then you're bound to get this. Now, I'm not saying that in this case Britain has done better than France or France has done better than the British, but in all over Europe, and I think also the United States, people have not explained, or the message hasn't gone through to Muslim minorities especially. And Islam is very different because Islam, unlike other religions, it's an every minute religion. It's an every second religion. It's an every hour religion. And one has to make very clear to every Muslim individual who comes to a liberal state where there is separation of church, there is something called the public space, where we would prefer to have no religion. If that message gets across to Muslim individuals, and I trust that they're going to understand that and respect it, then we have no problem. But that attempt has never been made because when Muslims first came to Europe, and I think partly to the United States, that coincided with when all these notions of multiculturalism and all these were in. This was the fashionable thing to do. And so turning this back is more difficult because rights once you have given have become entitlements, and it's very difficult to take away entitlements. Right. And so now you have to go and preach the coming 30 years about not only rights but also obligations.
Right. You say your face. Let me just check the microphones. I promised I would do that. Nobody there. Well, okay. Since you sprinted, I'll let you ask it. The microphone doesn't seem to be on.
Is that better?
Yeah. Very much better.
We were observing that you could really look at most religions and find something draconian in any religion that people would use as an excuse to commit acts of violence. And I wonder if you could speak more specifically about what it is in the Islamic religion that you think foments terrorism, because I think I'm curious, and also I think there's a lot of Muslims who would argue that no, in fact, if you really are abiding by the precepts of the Quran, you would never commit an act of terrorism, and that this is aberrant. So I wonder if you could be more specific about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to say that there are a lot of Muslims who will not commit any act of terrorism. I think, fortunately, the majority of Muslims today will not commit acts of terrorism. But to argue that there is nothing in Islam that leads to violence, that would be a weak argument to a false argument. Because if you define Islam as submission to the will of Allah, and then you find out what that submission means, if you find out that the sixth obligation is to convert others to Islam, first by peaceful means, then by violent means. If a wife is disobedient, you beat her. If something is stolen, you amputate the hand of the thief. That's Sharia, that is Islamic law. The country, the Muslim country, the Vatican City of Islam, Saudi Arabia, has Sharia and enforces these laws. And every time any group of people succeed in establishing Sharia or Islamic law anywhere, from the Taliban in Afghanistan to Pakistan to Iran to Zamfara province, the Zamfara province in Nigeria, and these laws are applied, they are uniform and they're recognizable. So then Islam is a violence. You can't argue and get away with it, that it's not a violent religion. Then you say, but what about Judaism? What about Christianity? Now, adherents of these religions over the centuries have been pacified to understand and accept the separation of the divine and the worldly. So we can now elect every 4 years in the United States a secular president. And well, if every atheist has been sleeping, we may elect a religious president. But still, secular law applies. Secular law applies. Now, nowhere in the Muslim world has that profound pacification of Islam taken place. And I think that is the difference. So the notion that you can still establish a caliphate or an Islamic state is very, very, very strong among the Muslims, much stronger than among the Jews, the Christians, the Buddhists, or any other believing group.
Okay, thank you. We have another question over here.
Is this working? Yes. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on your courage. I am about a third of the way through your book, Infidel. And in reading about the brutality you suffered as a child, and now that you have, so to speak, turned your back on Islam, I'm wondering, first of all, are your parents still living? And if so, do you still have contact with them and your family, and what do they think? In other words, what price have you paid personally for the stand you have taken?
My parents are living, and I hope well. I've not had contact with my father since 2004, with my mother since 2003, with my brother New Year's Eve and New Year. And if I go back now, if I call them and I can track them, if I track them and I call them and I tell them I've converted back to Islam, I've gone off the straight path, I apologize for everything and all the naughty things I've done in the past 5 years, they will forgive me, and I believe it's true love in their hearts for me. But as long as I stay on believing what I believe and live the way I live, then there is this connection between us. Now, for me personally, that's very sad, and it's a very high price. But if you place this in context, then you're going to see that almost anyone who has gone, throughout the centuries, and even now, anyone who radically opposes the moral framework that the parents believe in, that this takes place. And some of the letters I get from readers of Infidel is that they tell me this. Some people write to me from the US, from Norway, from many places in the world, and they say, even though I have no idea that there are places like this in the world where people live, but I can understand the conflict between you and your parents because I have a similar conflict with my parents. And I know this is a price that we have to pay. And I know what I'm going to say is pathetic. But if we say, in the name of progress, this is something that I will or have suffered, but my children will not suffer. And if we think of humanity in generations, then, I don't think that I'm going to be around to see any of what I've contributed to, but the next generation is going to benefit from what we struggle for now. And we are all benefiting from what past generations have struggled for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. That was a great question.
Good, yeah.
I wonder if I could ask you another question myself. There's a debate in the US, something of a debate, as you've probably noticed, on the question of whether it's right to frame America's present national security problem, and the issue of terrorism, as a war on terror. A lot of people argue that is it's a mistake to frame it that way, that it leads to bad policies, and essentially it makes people more afraid than they need to be about this problem, and induces a kind of intellectual paralysis.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to know what you think about that term, war on terror, whether you approve of it or disapprove of it.
Let me see. If I indulge myself in a narcissistic way, I'll say I disapprove. If I put myself in the shoes of whoever invented the war. Infidels, girls and boys are separated, girls are taught to submit, and boys are taught to become potential jihadists.
Okay, we're out of time.